right, folks. So hopefully everyone can see now the screen on top. I will go through there in just a couple of things. First of all, some self-promotion here. If people have not heard of my Capital Naturalist social media, I invite you guys to follow along. It is kind of funny. We got about 7,000 at least on a Facebook group, and I think that now with people being out of work, we're up to 40 plus posts a day, which is a lot. So apparently people are still interested in nature, whether they're inside or not. So that's a good thing. So the other thing I wanted to mention is obviously this is a virtual walk, and in no way is it going to cover anywhere near all the different plants, the native plants in particular that we have out there. There's so many to focus on. For those of us in Northern Virginia area, there's maybe 1,700 plants that are recorded currently as living here. And at one time for you guys in Arlington, Arlington was such a diverse, biodiverse area that 28% of all the plants found in Virginia were at one time found in Arlington. So this is going to be a very simple type of look at the most common plants that we have nowadays, and that's all we can expect it to do. Maybe some other day we'll cover some of the other stuff as well. So we're actually going to get started, and we're going to basically follow along, looking at this from the beginning of the season to the end. So if we look at this very carefully, one of the first, probably maybe the second or third plant to be blooming this time of year. And folks, you might want to put the mute on because I can't hear some extra stuff from some of you guys, is Harbinger spring. The only ones that get usually preceded are maybe things like skunk cabbage, and maybe sometimes you get hepatica, but in reality, Harbinger spring is called Harbinger spring for a really good reason. It is one of the first plants to bloom. It's in minuscule, and because of the what you see as the anthers and the seeds forming on there, they're sometimes called pepper and salt. Scientific name, as you can see, Virginia bulbosa. It does have a bulb on the bottom that can be used for. It is edible, but of course, if you eat the bulb, you kill the little tiny plant as well. To go on here, I want to mention a couple of things that I'll have for most of this, and that is if people want to listen to this later on, at the top of the screen you'll see is a YouTube video. I've made a YouTube video of all the different plants that we have here, and on your own leisure, you're welcome to hit that, and you will be able to hear a little bit about the plants as I shoot video of whatever it is. You might even get some good looks at that. On some of the plants, for example, in this one, on the bottom, you'll notice I have a blog on this. So if you wanted to know more about the plant itself that I may have forgotten to mention, you're welcome to click on that later on too. So finally, if we look at this particular plant, we notice a couple of things. For one thing, this plant is in the carrot family. And being in the carrot family has umbels, has a little bunch of flowers that form in an umbel, much like a carrot would have. And because many plants in that family, carrot family, are edible, this is of course very, very edible. It's a tiny little plant. You can see here on the right hand side how it can fit so easily on my hand. It's a tiny, tiny little plant. But since it's one of the first things to bloom and one of the only times it ever gets noticed, it's in the springtime when you notice something very bright on the bottom of the forest floor and you find it. This particular plant is not a favorite for a lot of gardens and things like that because it's so minuscule, because its bloom period is so early in the season, and it's not very much commercially available. But it is a great little plant, and it's one of the ones that we can really look at. One of the first things we find when we're looking for any kind of wildflower walk. It's usually along river edges, very moist woods type of setting. That's where you find this particular plant. All right. So moving on. We'll ask questions after every second plant or so. So I'll cover one more. If people have some questions about this or the next plant, you're welcome to chat on in. All right. So the next one is one that most people have seen before because it's quite prominent in the woods these days. It's bloodroot. In fact, it's actually just starting to wrap up its blooming season. It's easy to see. It sends up with bright flowers that stand up very much in the moist woods in this area. There's a lot of neat things to it, and I'll mention a little bit about it. I do want to point out its scientific name, Sanguinaria canadensis. Sanguinaria points to the blood-like sap that it has that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but that is where the name comes from. You look over here, and again, at the top, you're welcome to get a little bit more of a video on this plant and so forth. And on the bottom, you're welcome to look at the blog on this plant as well. When we look at this plant itself, if you look to the right, we notice that this is what's called a myrmecoccus plant. Myrmecoccus plant, it's named after Myrmidon, which were Achilles' soldiers back during that age. it's called that because ants, being like soldiers, they go to work on this plant. About 30% of the plants in this area are what they call myrmecoccus plants. They use ants to spread the seeds, and there's some big advantages about that. We're one of the hot spots for myrmecockery in the whole world. Overall, about 5% of plants in the whole world are myrmecoccus, but around here, about 30% of our plants, something like 42 local plants, are myrmecoccus plants. And what they do is the seeds that are grown from here have, and I don't know if I can get I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here on the side, I'm looking at one of the seeds, and you'll notice there's a little extension to it. That is what's commonly called an elaiosome. And that elaiosome is something that's very special. It's a protein packet, a lipid packet that grows on the side. And in some cases, and it's believed that bloodroot is one of them, they give out special pheromones that certain species of ants find irresistible. So they come on by, get the plant, or I should say get the seed, and take it back with them. When they do so, they rip off the seed, which to them is unedible, and they throw it out. When they do that, they throw it into their waste containers. So waste containers are full of all sorts of, it's underground, it's protected under there, the ants are guarding it, it's moist, and it's very nutritious because of all of the waste material that are in there. They eat the elaiosome because that's what they're really going for. But in this case with bloodroot, Marion Lobson, some people may know as a local botanist, she did some studies, and it turns out that without an elaiosome being pulled out of the plant, this particular plant will not bloom very well. And so you might sometimes see a whole pile of them where the ants haven't spread them yet. But in reality, without the elaiosome being removed, it doesn't grow very well. So just think of it when you think about all the spring wildflowers. The plants need the ants need the plants. It's kind of how we all kind of get together. So before you go cursing the picnic ants, just remember they do perform a very important duty. At least some of them do. Now the middle section, you'll notice I've took out one of the roots and I've cut it open, and what you see now is this blood red material. In fact, it's already stained some of my hand. This was used by people to make a dye. It was a very potent type of dye, and even more so, different people, especially the indigenous folks, would actually wear this as a body paint. And some people might ask, well, why do this? Possibly for a couple of reasons. Now, even though this plant is a beautiful plant out there, it has certain toxins in it that make it some people have a rash if they touch this plant, and that is a problem. But many of the indigenous folks actually wear this on their skin, and some people think that maybe even the name redskin may have come from the actual painting of their dyeing of their skin because of this particular plant. All right, so that's something to think about. Now, this plant though has all sorts of things to protect it. It's very, very bitter. Sometimes it's been called snake bite, so forth. It's a kind of plant that really, really protects itself in those particular ways. So why would you put this thing on your face or the rest of your body to do so? It's because they think that it may have helped prevent things like ticks and fleas and things like that from biting you. Much as if you might now spray some DEET or whatever onto your skin to protect yourself against ticks and so forth today, mosquitoes, this would have done the same kind of thing. Now, it's just a theory, but it's just one of the things that people are mentioning. Oh, this plant has lots of different names to it. And then the last part, you'll notice the plant is actually wrapped around its flower as it comes out. It protects as it comes out. And one of the names that they give it is papoose flower. A lot of the other names for it have to do with the puccoon, the bloody color, whatever that comes from it. Believe it or not, there were some anti-plaque properties that were found in this thing. And in the early part of the century, this was one of the main ingredients, what they call Biotin toothpaste, something that actually, that people who actually used in order to protect themselves that way. So anyways, a very neat kind of thing. People have used it also as a fever reducer. They used to make different kinds of things out of it. They treated ringworm with it, all sorts of different kinds of things. So this was a plant that was used not just something to look at in the outdoors, but was used by different people, and in modern times as a dye by people too. During the Civil War, as people may know, the South did not have a lot of the luxuries that the North may have had at the time. Being blockaded in, they had to come up with their own version of how to deal with the common things that were no longer available because they couldn't be shipped in. And so they set up an interesting system. A doctor named Francis Porcher was assigned the duty of finding things locally that you can use to basically for ethnobotany, something you could use locally that you no longer get. And this was one of the plants that he focused on, this particular plant for relieving fevers and for, you know, against things like coughs and things like that. This was one of the plants that he listed in his studies, the big book that they put together. It's now sometimes just called Confederate Ethnobotany. Anyways, before I continue on, there's lots more to talk about. I will say, oh yeah, the other thing. There's a thing called the Doctrine of Signatures, and the Doctrine of Signatures basically says is something that some higher power, whatever that may be, put on his earth plants and gave them some kind of sign that we could that could then be used to figure out what it was good for. This plant, Sanguinaria, because it's bloody red, they thought would be good against any kinds of things having to do with the blood and so forth. And so during the Doctrine of Signatures, this was a plant that we used for medical types of things having to do with the blood. And you know, that's just one of the reasons that it did it. So I will now stop for a second. If you guys do have something you want to ask, I'll be happy to answer it. If not, we'll continue on to the next one.
The conversation on the chat box has to do with success in growing this in gardens. And one participant says she has lots, having started with just a few, and they've spread all over her yard. So would you have any wisdom to share about how to be successful in using this in your garden, Alonso?
This is a great plant. Now, I will say the flowers are very short-lived. I mean, you can look at them the wrong way and the petals fall off. But having said that, it's actually one of the plants that can self-pollinate. By doing so, it means that most of the time you do get a good batch of seeds from this. So it spreads quite well. If there are no ants around, it'll form a nice clump of the plants right nearby it. So if you do purchase this plant, it likes shady areas. It does like moist soil, but it will very quickly form a nice clump of plants, especially if there are no ants around, because of these things. It almost always produces seeds one way or the other, and that is a positive. It's an easy plant to try to maintain in a garden, even though again it's short-lived as far as its color is concerned. It also transplants well. You have to be careful because you don't want to get some of this liquid and whatever on you, but you can divide it. Oh, I'm sorry. You can divide it fairly easily and move it that way as well. It hangs on for a little bit longer than many of the other ephemeral plants, especially if it's forming seeds. And so you at least have the look of the leaf, if not the flower, for a good portion of the spring and into the summer.
Talk about deer, please. Do deer like this plant?
No, they do not like the plant. Again, the same toxins that were used again for these other types of things make it that deer do not like it. It apparently one of the other common names for it used to be one common was snakebite, because if you bit into this, it felt like you're getting stung by a snake. It really tastes horrible to many different things, and apparently to deer too. This is one of the deer-resistant plants. It certainly can't be called deer-proof because nothing is. When they're hungry enough, they'll eat anything. But it is one that plants that the deer don't prefer to eat, at least at first. Any other questions, folks? Well, if we have, if we have no other questions, let's continue on to the next one. One which I think most people recognize and is a favorite, and that's, of course, spring beauty. In this case, Virginia spring beauties. There is a Carolina spring beauties. It's up in the mountains, but all of ours are what they call Virginia spring beauties. They're very slender-leaved and so forth. Named after John Clayton, one of the first botanists here in Virginia, and it's a beautiful plant with a lot of neat things to it. Again, along here, if you like, on the top left, you are more than welcome to click on there if you want to see, if you do want to catch a video of this. And at the bottom, I do have a blog. Now, this plant spreads quite well. When it's ripe, it actually shoots its seed up to a couple of feet away. Watch the mute, folks. I think somebody might need to put their mute on. You can actually see how it can spread, because it spreads these up to 2 feet away. It can form a huge expanse of white to it. Now, the other thing to it is that even though each flower only lasts about a week, but in reality, the season for this, and the plant as a species can start off in spring and go all the way into May, sometimes even into June. It's got one of the longest blooming periods of any one plant. And because of that, it provides nectar and pollen for a huge bunch of pollinators. Of all the plants locally studied, none have gotten more pollinators to visit it than this particular plant. And it's not only that, but there's some variation in the color. You'll see bright pink ones. The nectar guides you see on there, the lines will change and so forth. It is a great little plant for naturalizing, and it provides a ton of pollinator services that other plants don't do. And also, if you see down below, I have an interesting little a little bee on there. That is actually a spring beauty bee. It is actually it's a bee that can visit other flowers, but without the pollen from Claytonia, it cannot reproduce. So if you have this plant around, you're ensuring that this particular bee is able to reproduce again. Again, a really, really neat little plant. Continuing on, I noticed a couple things. One of it is, if you were to dig out the bottom, they're sometimes called Sperry buds because there is basically a tuber on the bottom. And that particular one is very edible. I've eaten them, but of course, if you do that, you do kill the plant. But it's quite edible. And before in ancient times, this was an important plant. If you think about it, by early springtime, you've used up most of your winter stores. And this plant, by blanketing the whole area with white flowers, tells you right away, hey, here is an edible food source that's easy to get. You only have to dig a couple inches down to get one of these kinds of fruit. Now, when it first comes up, I will say the grass-like leaves, if it only has one leaf, it will not bloom, okay? It can take a couple of years, sometimes 3 or 4, for it to form more than one leaf. When it has more than one leaf, then that's when it finally blooms. It won't bloom before it gets those particular leaves. So you might have a little bit of patience, but it's actually matures fairly quickly and makes a really neat type of plant. If you do buy it, what they send you, of course, is the tuber, the fairy spud that you're able to put together. By the way, if you notice some of them on the left, you'll see there's this particular kind of rust. Again, it's a kind of rust that only is found on spring beauties, and Harbinger spring too, the two things that are on. So it hosts a lot of stuff that other things aren't able to do, and I think that's kind of an important thing. So again, that's spring beauties for you. I'll continue on to the next one if you guys like. Yeah, okay. So continue on to the next one. We have cutleaf toothwort, which is the most common one around here. This is one that's been changed quite a bit. The name toothwort comes from the idea that the roots look a little bit like a tooth, and because of that, they gave the name toothwort. Most plants that have a wart added onto their name usually implies it was used for something. In this case, toothwort, it goes back to the doctrine of signatures that because it looks like a tooth, well, then obviously it's good for toothaches and that kind of stuff. And that's what it was used for. For the longest time, the actual former scientific name was dentaria, having to do again with dentine. It's a tooth. So all of it was done that way. Later on, it was changed to another kind of family, the mustard family, cardamine. But that's basically where the name came from. The roots are actually very tasty. Some people call them horseradish roots or pepper roots. People have used them in spring salads and so forth. But again, the caution: when you eat the root, you kill these plants. Many spring plants store their energies in underground because these are ephemeral plants. All the plants that we looked at so forth come on in the springtime, and once the leaves are on the trees, they're not able to produce any more of their own energy. So they die back and stay underground. And so those roots are what they depend on until the following year when they do this. So when you do eat the leaf, when you eat the root, you do kill this kind of thing. So this is a really cool little plant. Let me go on to the next one. I want to show you. The cut leaf is because if you notice on the leaves, they're very cut. They're cut oriented. That was another thing having to do with lacinato, the old name for it. It meant that it was heavily cut along its petals, along its leaves itself. Look over here. Again, you're more than welcome. There's a video on in the top, and there's a blog on in the bottom. This particular plant, you notice, is actually hanging down. Many plants in the spring, and the spring beauty, one of them, when it starts to get dark, which usually means either at nighttime or it's going to rain, the plants either close their leaves and point down. The spring beauties do this, and this one does it too. Why? Because now the rain can't also wash away the nectar and the pollen for future things. So many of the plants that you notice, if you go on a rainy day or something like that, they'll be closed up. They won't be anywhere near as nice as you would normally find them. And that's what this one's doing. It's sleeping. And again, it also does this at very cold temperatures, because at a certain temperature, which is the same temperature that the spring beauty bee comes out, that's the temperature many of these things start to lie down or whatever, and just conserve their energy for a future type of thing. So anyways, this is a sleeping toothwort, cutleaf toothwort. Now I want you to look over here. If you look over here where my cursor is going, you notice this thing has 4 leaves. I'm sorry, 4 petals. It is a cress, and cresses are a type of mustard, and all cresses have four petals on them. That's one of the things that makes the cress, is the cross, the interesting little the formation of it. Okay, so that's important. I want you to notice another cress though that sometimes is very much confused with it, because over here to the right, this is another thing in mustard families. This is garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is of course not the same as right next to it, this cutleaf toothwort, and that's where some of the problems come in. This is an invasive. The garlic mustard is not native, and it's allelopathic. It sends out certain chemicals that prevent other things from growing, but more so, it causes a lot of issues, in particular for the toothworts, because there's a certain kind of butterfly. Actually, it's more than one kind of butterfly. It's a couple of kind of butterflies, but what they call, in the family of what they call whites. The most famous is the West Virginia white. And the West Virginia white, what they do is they come by and they look around for the plants, and when they find what they think is the appropriate plant, they land on them and they draw them. They actually hit the plants, and that's how they basically get some of the chemicals from there, and they taste it with their feet. So if they taste the mustard oil, mustard, this is a toothwort, and they lay their eggs there, and that's that would help the West Virginia white caterpillars. Unfortunately, the problem with this is that garlic mustard is much more prominent and grows bigger than toothworts. And so if one of these West Virginia whites lands on this particular plant, and actually, I'm sorry guys, I went a little too fast, and actually lands on there and tastes it, they taste an oil, but it's the wrong oil. They lay their eggs there, and what happens to a butterfly? It dies. Why? Because it is not evolved to use the mustard oils of the garlic mustard. It's evolved with the mustard oils of the toothwort itself, and that is a problem. Now, should this thing though does get pollinated and so forth, it produces little seeds. You can see here to the side. This is what the seeds would look like down here. They basically spring on out, and that's how it would start another types of things. The doctrine of signatures I mentioned before, again, it was good for toothaches. People have been using it as that for the longest time as well. Now we also have another kind of toothwort that's found around here, but only in certain areas. On the right is slender toothwort. Okay, it used to be called heterophylla because the leaves are different. On the bottom you get a basal leaf, which is wide, and up on top you have 2 other leaves. They then changed it. Now it's called angustata. Oh, I misspelled that, but anyway, it's angustata. So it's changed the name of it. But it is a plant that's in the mountains. But in many of our areas, what do we have right nearby? We have the Potowmack River, and many plants that normally up in the mountains come down along the river, and when they find just the appropriate niche, that's just the right kind of habitat, they can grow. So this is the case with the slender toothwort. You can find it in certain places along the river here in Arlington and Fairfax. Why? It's come down, found a good place, and it can grow there. It, again, is very similar to cutleaf toothwort in that, it supports the West Virginia white and so forth and so on. Again, it's edible. The roots are, the pepper root is edible on it, the whole kind of thing itself. But again, it only found in certain places along the rivers where it finds just the right place to go. Again, below it, I put down a video that you can see on slender toothwort, and we won't talk much more about it because, again, it's only limited around the Potowmack River around our areas. But you will see that in a lot of other things. Many mountain plants find a niche right along the Potomac with us, and we'll see that more and more as we go along. So going on to the next one. So here's one of everyone's favorite, and that's the sessile or toadshade Trillium. The word sessile means stalkless, and in reality, if you look at this, the plant is coming straight out of the bottom of the plant itself. It does not have a stalk to the actual flower itself. So it's sessile or stalkless Trillium. Again, the scientific name really easy, Trillium sessile. Everything in a trillium comes in 3s. That's the name Trillium. It's got 3 leaves. It's got 3 leaves. It's got 3 sepals. That is, that's the way that it grows. So everything on it is in 3s. This kind of plant, it takes a while for it to reproduce. Depending on what type of plant it is and how rich the area, it can take them 3 to 7 years for them to actually produce flowers. So it's important to know that. Another big thing about it is that you don't want to, this is a plant that should not be removed out of the outdoors. If you do buy one, you know, be careful how it's been collected and so forth, because they are disappearing, even this more common one, simply because people are getting them out of the outdoors and they don't grow very well. You know, once you get them going, it's fine. But if you're moving outdoors, you are carrying something away from nature, as it were. Again, on here, the top is a nice little video on it if you want to look at. It comes in many shades. This is the more common one, the maroon little colored one. But before, if you noticed out here, there's also greenish ones, there's yellow ones, and so forth. There's lots of different batches on them. This is another myrmecoccus plant, another ant spread plant. And when they don't spread that much, you get this big pile, which is kind of neat looking. You get a big pile of them when an ant has not moved it from one place to another. So this is Trillium. Down here, you can take a little look at it. Here you have on the right both some different colored ones. You got the regular kind up here and the other one up top. This is a nice patch of Trillium, but again, it can do that quite a bit. This plant is kind of unusual. It doesn't smell that good. In fact, the leaves don't open up on it. They basically stay closed, like you can see over here. And so it doesn't attract the regular pollinators. It's not the butterflies and bees that do this. In fact, if you look in the middle, what I found uses them more than anything else, although I also heard fungus gnats using things like that. What I have found is certain kinds of click beetle. And here in the middle, you can see a couple of them already in there. They come in there and they basically smell the flower and they're trying to get food. So they eat some of the pollen, which isn't great for the plant, but while they're doing it, they're also moving it around. They move to another plant, and that's how they pollinate it. Since they're already there to eat anyway, these are multitasking type of things. They also use them to find each other's mate. So basically, these flower heads, if you ever were to look inside of one and you find a bunch of these click beetles, the little orgy spots now for these guys to produce even more seeds for these things. But that is the way that they do it. I've asked actually a lot of times what these particular click beetles are called, but I've not found a good answer yet. Hopefully one day I will find them. But again, it's not attracting your typical pollinator. In this case, it's attracting things like fungus gnats and click beetles. That's the kind of stuff that it normally is growing. This is, again, if you do purchase one and it's not been collected for a while, it does fairly well. It can take a little bit. It likes light shade, again, moist areas, and in a very short amount of time, it can spread quite a bit. It seems to have each little seed on it seems to have a high germination rate when it's right near it, and you can find a nice little population of them in any one place. Okay, and the other thing I should mention with the cutleaf toothwort, again, it also has the pepper root on there. If you get it, and especially if it hasn't flowered or anything like that, if you do buy it, you buy the root and you plant it. It also does very, very well. We've moved them before. We did a plant rescue at Arlington Cemetery, and when we moved them, we got maybe 100 of those little toothworts out of cutleaf toothworts. And when we planted them, we didn't think a lot of them would survive, but the very next year, it was amazing how many of those do survive once they were moved. And we got good soil around them and moved to a new area. So they do okay in different places as long as it's slightly wet and it's shady. That's what they need in order to survive. If there are any other questions, I'll stop here and we'll continue with the chat. If not, we'll continue on. There's lots more to talk about.
One question is whether toads can hide under Trillium.
Yeah, so the name toadshade is not just applied to this one, which yes, could serve as a very good thing for them, but toadshade is also applied for Mayapples, which we'll talk about later on. So yes, it definitely could hide one of them. There's no reason that they would not take advantage of something like that. That's for sure.
There's another question from somebody who asked about how Claytonia could be propagated.
So again, if it produces a flower head, it can reproduce. There are some people that claim, and one of the reasons they don't want you to remove it from the wild, that if you do try to remove it, they think that this one has some interesting properties. It needs certain kind of fungal, mycorrhizal fungal into it. So if you move it, you may separate from the fungus and it may die on you. If it's grown in a pot, if you buy it that way, there's a good chance that when you move the whole area of the pot itself, hopefully there's enough fungus in there that you can actually start a new one of these. Most of the plants over here have a definite connection to certain kind of fungus. I think the only one we talked about so far that doesn't have that is, I believe, Harbinger Spring. It may not have an actual fungal relationship to it, but most of these other ones, they need fungus in the soil. Luckily, most of this fungus is fairly common in most of our woods. And in fact, there's some experiments about mulching things with leaf mulch and things like that in the hopes that the fungus is on some of these leaf mulch. When it decomposes, it hopefully adds this fungus to the different areas. But again, this plant is not difficult to grow. It really isn't if you buy it if you buy it and it's got this it's got a good amount of soil in the pot itself. It does transplant fairly well. Keep it watered and so forth. Don't expect much from it from the first year or two. What did he say about things like that? What, the first year they sleep, the next second year they creep, and finally they leap? That's what you really got to expect out of something like this. It'll take a little while for these things to really get going, but when they do, it is pretty beautiful type of thing to do.
So I'd like to make one clarification before we move on.
Yes.
Alonso has given us these wonderful references to websites where you can either connect to written materials or YouTube videos that he's produced. Those will not work while we're actually going through this, but we're going to make available, as Kirsten already said, both a recording of this webinar, and also we'll try to figure out how to make available to you the PowerPoint itself so that those clicks can be active for you.
Yeah. Hey, one other thing I should mention about the trilliums is a very interesting thing. If you read any of the books, some books will say it's edible, and some people say it won't. Some people say that it is edible, other people say that it won't. Maybe it's got something to do with how much you eat or something like that. So regardless, in some places, some of the Native American tribes that actually use this to induce vomiting. So that doesn't appeal to how great it might taste or something. But in other times, they use it for medicinal purposes too, including things like childbirth and whatever. So this is one of those that some people consider edible, and some people say it's not, that it will cause harm, in this case, inducing vomiting. So again, I have not personally tasted this one, maybe because I'm not ready to end my day early by vomiting later on. But it is one that again, there's mixed results as to whether or not you can eat it, and maybe there's a certain way of preparing it that I have not heard of. But again, some people will claim it's edible. All right, moving on to the next one then. So here we have the yellow trout lilies, what some people call dogtooth violets, the adder's tongue, fawn ears, whatever it is. There are lots of different names to them. Again, here, you'll notice that there is a video that you're more than welcome to pop on at the end of all of this. Here is a good patch of them, and the names fawn ears and adder's tongues comes for a very special reason. Most of the time, this spreads vegetatively, and you got tons of little trout lily leaves, which again has the little splotches on the side, like a side of a trout, that'll spread all over, but very, very few flowers. They think that this plant needs a lot of time in order to get enough energy stored in its roots for it to flower. Other people say that when it reaches a certain kind of resistance, like a wall or something like that, on a rock or something, it's more likely to bloom. I don't know if that's true or not, but when you do find a nice thing like that, you'll see that that each of the plants no longer produces one leaf, but produces two. That's where the fawn ears come from, as in two ears of a fawn, or the adder's tongue, like this, like the forked tongue of a snake. And it's only the ones that have two leaves that will flower. The vast majority of what you have will not flower. It makes for a very cool ground cover. It is ephemeral. It only lasts in the springtime until leaves leaf out and it dies off, but it makes for a really nice cover in certain areas. But again, you're not going to expect a lot of flowering. It takes a long time for this thing to develop enough in order for it to flower. So over here, you can see in the middle, here is a nice big patch of just tons and tons of trout lily, but you don't see anything blooming on there. And on the left, you are able to see that the yellow trout lily between its two leaves, what it looks like and so forth. There's making studies on this, and I know some of the Armand folks may participate in this, to see about it, because some of the anthers in the middle are yellow and some are red, and they're trying to figure out if that's something that is it a different species? Essentially, what is it that makes some of them red anthers and some have yellow anthers? And some people are studying that. Now, again, on the right-hand side, you have a white trout lily. Now, white trout lily is a different species. This is albidium. The other one's americanum. This is a different species that normally is up in the mountains. But again, along the rivers, and like for example, Turkey Run and Riverbend and places like that, the nice thing is that it flows downriver, and sometimes it finds just a nice niche, and it will also grow. It will also grow there. It's not as heavily splotched as the yellow trout lily, and again, it has white flowers instead of yellow. But that is another. It is another trout lily which is found just along the edges of rivers, and that's a little bit about trout lilies. So moving on. we'll talk a little bit about violets. A lot of people, it's so ubiquitous. A lot of people don't admire them for what they are, but they're actually beautiful little plants and are very, very important. So I'm going to spend a little time on the violets, just a little bit. The most common one is this one, the common blue violet, that forms, you know, yes, it has the normal blue color, but on the right, you'll see it sometimes comes in a Confederate form, a lighter colored version, sometimes gray, sometimes white, but anyways, it comes in these two forms. So it's the same plant, exactly the same, except some mutations come out blue and other ones come out lighter colored than that. But it is the exact same violet. Now, this violet has a lot of interesting things to it. For example, yes, it finds this beautiful, I guess it's what, a cosmogamous bloom, a pretty little bloom that attracts pollinators, okay? And it does. And if a pollinator pollinates it, then that's great. But one of the reasons that this is such an ubiquitous flower and is so good at surviving is that just in case it does not get pollinated, it forms a second type of flower. The second type of flower is called a cleistogamous flower. That means closed marriage. And cleistogamous flowers are up right near they never open, so they're right near the bottom of the plant itself and so forth, and it self-pollinates. Now, self-pollination is not a good long-term tactic in order for you to survive and get genetic diversity and things like that. But if it's the only shot you got of reproducing, it's a good deal. So if nobody visits the pretty flowers, as it were, then it forms these closed flowers, the cleistogamous flowers, and it will still reproduce. And so that's why it spreads all over the lawn and things like that. As if that wasn't enough, all violets that I'm aware of, all violets are also myrmecophorous plants. So the ants spread the plants, spread the seeds themselves. Another reason that they can spread far and wide. Now, so here again, we've got more Confederate violets, both the lighter colored one and the normal color on the side. A lot of neat things about them. First of all, violets are high in vitamin C and they were edible. All the violets are, although a lot of people prefer not to eat the yellow violets. They think that perhaps they're not as tasty as some of the other ones. The leaves don't taste as good as the flowers, and the flowers have been candied and added to salads or candied and just added as something neat to eat. But again, it is high in vitamin C and so forth. In fact, this was the violets, and again, not our violets, but the European violets. They were considered part of a sign of the Bonapartist movement because Bonaparte said he'll come back with the violets of the spring and so forth. And apparently Josephine loved to eat violets, ate something like half a cup of violets every day. And it's thought that Napoleon actually went and laid flowers at a grave that were violets themselves. This is a very neat plant, and there's a lot of neat things to it. I'll tell you one quick little legend about it, and then we'll move on, although there's lots of other things. And that is the name and why it's called violet and why is it, who it honors. The viola was actually, in ancient times in mythology, was actually a beautiful girl that apparently one of the gods, in this case, it was Jupiter, okay, fell in love with. And Jupiter, and again, in the Greek version, it would change, but again, Jupiter fell in love with this lady and unfortunately made advances on her and so forth. The bad news was that unfortunately, Jupiter's wife, and again in Greek times it would be Hera, was actually the patron of marriage, and so it was the wrong person to cheat on, as it were. And so when she found out that Viola had an affair with Jupiter, okay, there was a lot of she was going to get even for it. And now there's different versions of the story. In one case, yes, Hera in this case catches up with Viola and turns her into a cow, and her tears then become the violets. In another version, the violets were made by Jupiter to give her something sweet to eat. In another version, Jupiter actually changes her into a cow because whatever Hera would have done would have been so much worse. And the violets again were her tears that then followed. But in any of these stories, it's always Viola that ends up being the loser in all of this. And it's after her that they named the violets after. This is the most common one, but we have something like 32 maybe kinds of violets in Virginia. And so just really quickly, if I go to the next one, just a couple of the other ones that you may see around that are also used quite a bit in sometimes used in gardens and so forth. Again, I like to encourage violets in my yard. Frankly, they're better. A lot of people don't mow the lawn to let things like clover and dandelions grow. But I'll tell you right now, these plants, the violets and so forth, evolved with their pollinators. They provide much more, much better sources of what the pollinators need than those other ones do. So I like having these things grow in whatever little way that they can in my yard. But there's some other ones too. We have a light colored version that's sometimes called the cream or striped violet. It's kind of a neat one. And again, there's a video on it at the bottom if you want to learn more. It's a tall violet, much taller than many of the other ones. And then on the right side, we have the yellow violet. And that's kind of cool too. It's it's one of the tallest violets we have, can grow really big. And its seed pods, when it does form little tiny, they look like little pods on there, which I think is very, it's kind of neat to look at. It's different from any other ones. But anyways, violets are a neat little thing. Another thing, as far as not just pollinators, but actually violets have something like 30 different kinds of caterpillars that feed on it, which is pretty important. The most common one are the fritillaries. All the fritillaries with little orange butterflies feed on this kind of thing, but there's over 30 kinds of caterpillars that feed on violets. So when you allow violets to grow in your yard, it does much more than something like a dandelion, which maybe just from violets and bloom might supply some nectar, but this supplies some real value in your yard, and I always encourage them in there. So before moving on to the next one, if there's any questions about the last couple of things we talked to, please go right ahead.
Well, I'm going to wade in and then invite anybody who would like to ask a question to unmute yourself in order to do so.
Okay.
Because the problem has been raised in the chat box. A problem my husband identifies with is that when you have them in your garden, they will take over.
They will.
I can say that I brought in both the smooth yellow violet and the striped violet, the striata, and the striata has been a real thug and has taken over, and the smooth yellow disappeared. So I don't know what other people's experiences have been, except the thuggish behavior of all violets.
I will say, and that's got a lot to do with their adaptability, and it also means that the ants are doing their job and spreading again this myrmecoccus plant from one place to another. It can happen. I find that. So I find that the more open growing type of places, like common blue violets do okay in there, but both the yellow violets and the striped violets, the cream violets, prefer a little bit more shade. I don't think they do that well in open areas. I think that that does kind of contain them where they can grow. The only problem is though that both the yellow and the cream violets do like to grow in similar habitats there, and I can see where one can overpower the other one. But that is one difference between one and the other. And again, there's so many different kinds of violets. These are only a couple, but it's a good look at a few of them at least, anyways. But they do have that. Some of them can have some sluggish behavior. And I will say there are some violets which are very particular about where they will grow. We have some in there in the bog, for example, in Barcroft. They don't grow anywhere else in the county but in that area. That they prefer those boggy conditions in order for them to grow. Any other questions?
Don't seem to be. There have been some comments about salads and candied and simple syrups made with these things. So everyone enjoy your violets.
Yes, and again, I don't say you should convert everything to this or whatever, but allowing a few of these to grow is a good thing. Not just for you, but for wildlife as well. Not just the 30-some caterpillars to feed on it, but a lot of things that will nectar at these particular flowers themselves. It's a good thing to have around. No reason to do away with these things when they're doing so well in these areas, supplying some good wildlife value.
Hi, it's Allison. I have a question about the pollinators for.
Yes.
So for all these spring ephemerals, what do these pollinators adapt to a different food source once the ephemerals are done with their blooming, or are they?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Many of the things that evolve. Let's go back to, for example, the toothworts. That is what the butterfly, the West Virginia white butterfly that grows to live just on that spring ephemeral, is what they call univoltine. It comes out one time a year in the springtime. Same with the falcate orange strip, which visits some of the other mustards. After that, they will not come out again, okay? They are tied together with that plant to come out, and then they will not, they only come on the springtime and you never see them again. With some other kinds of things like bees, you have to understand that most of our solitary bees come out in the springtime. They come out because of the flush of great spring wildflowers we have. They come out, some of them up to about May or so, and then they die off, and then the next series of bees come in. Many of the bees are very tied in, especially to the pollen. As I mentioned, the spring beauty bee, that's it. That's all that they can feed on. And if it doesn't, it's never going to reproduce. So that is important. And so, yeah, many of the bees are tied with a special kind of family of plants, and that's what they can do. And remember, we have about 450 kinds of bees, at least here in Virginia. And many of them, about 30% of them, are tied in with a very particular family or set of plants. If you don't plant those bees are gone. All we ever think about are the honeybees, but in reality, that's a generalist bees. Most of those 450 native bees, they have a specific thing, like the spring beauty bee, of a specific plant that they have to go to or they cannot reproduce. That's why it's important to preserve the natives.
Great, thank you so much.
All right. So we'll move on then, and again, there'll be more chance to ask questions. We'll move on to a couple more because there's a lot more. Here's two that I tied together. The Dutchman's breeches and the squirrel corn. Obviously, Dutchman's breeches, the idea is that it's like little pantaloons hanging to dry, and that's what it looks like. And the squirrel corn is basically, some people call them white, bleeding hearts. They're basically a heart-shaped type of thing. These are called dicentras. Dicentra has to do with two spurs. And if you look at these at the front, there are two spurs in the front. They're made so that only very specific things, in most cases it's bumblebees. And this is a favorite of early bumblebees that are just starting to establish their own little hives. They come and visit these because they're strong enough to push open those, the spurs to get inside and get the honey. So the big thing for these are bumblebees are the main pollinators for this particular plant. But they're neat kind of plants. The Dutchman's breeches bloom about 1 or 2 weeks before the squirrel corn on the right. Quick little thing here. So again, if you want to, again, a video on the top, a little blog that talks about the differences on the bottom. Here you can see again, the plant leaves look very, very similar. One slightly lighter than the other, but if you were to see just the leaves out there, you wouldn't know one or the other. Dutchman's breeches much more common than squirrel corn. Now, if you were to dig down underneath the root of the squirrel corn, you do find out that guess what? They do have what looks like a little corn kernel down there, and that's one way to tell them apart. But you do have to dig up and disturb the soil. Not a good thing to do with these plants. As I mentioned before, here you have, and it's also carpenter bees too. But yes, the main pollinator, the one pushing it apart, you see over there is that. I have bottom here some videos that you can look at both of them. Another name for both of these plants is called lambkill. The plants have, and I don't know if it's cordalis, it might be, it's got a certain stimulant in there, which affects hearts. And that protects this thing. This is another one that a lot of things don't like to eat. It protects itself for a short amount of time. Because it's an early spring ephemeral, it comes out and it concentrates a lot of these chemicals in here that animals don't like to eat. And so it does protect itself in that way. This is yet another, remember cockroach plants, thanks to the ants, it spreads from one place to another. And it's all of the things in this thing, the corydalises, the bleeding hearts, the squirrel corn, all of these things all depend on ants to spread part of the seeds. But a neat little plant, once you grow it, it forms little colonies. It tends to do really well in shady gardens. It looks delicate, but it's not. Once you plant it in there, it tends to spread quite well every year. But it does like, again, some shady type of location. And again, it does like moist soils. That is one of the things that it really needs to do. But otherwise, it can really spread. And if the ants aren't around to spread it, you find nice big patches of these things all in one area. Anyways, it's pretty important for that. There's only one kind of a caterpillar, I believe, that feeds on this thing, so it's not that important for other things, but still important to itself, and a great little plant to have out there. And again, for it's mostly deer resistant, believe it or not. The flowers maybe not so much, but the leaves themselves are very resistant to having animals chew on them. It's just again toxic to most of them, thus the name lambkill. Moving on to the next one. We got one of everybody's favorite, that's the Virginia Bluebells, okay? Again, named after John Mertens, another botanist. Beautiful little things, and again, they hang down below, thus the bell-like colors to them, or the bell-like name to them. Again, here is a little bit of the video on it, and you in the video can see some of the great expanses of this. It spreads quite easily. In fact, one of the neat things to say about this is if you do want to plant this, and again, it likes shady areas and it does like moist areas, but it spreads quite rapidly. This is one where the water can really spread it. So if you plant it in your yard, one of the things that many people do is you plant it upslope, as it were, and keep it moist there or whatever. When it recedes, all of the seeds go downhill, and so it'll slowly spread downwards, as it were. Because it starts to, the leaves start to get kind of nasty after a while, start to, decompose and don't look as nice. Many people plant it with some deciduous types of ferns and things like that. But just as the ferns are growing out and taking up the space, this plant is dying down under, and you can make the same use of the space with two different plants that do fairly well. Many of the plants that come out bluish in the springtime. I don't know if that's something to do with how much light they get and so forth, but that is one of the things. And then they turn lighter as they come out. There are, as you can see, not just bluebells, but there's pink bells and white bells. I remember being at Riverbend one time, and somebody came over and say, "Hey, what is this white bell-like flower?" And I'm like, "It's a bluebell." And I go, "No, it's not. It's not blue." Well, of course, nothing is more variable than color in nature. So you have to understand that this comes in a variety of different colors, including great white ones. The more plants there are, the greater the chance for this genetic diversity. That's why places like Riverbend and places like that have, and Bull Run, they have tons of these kinds of things. And in there, you can find just about, all the different colors that you can from bluebells in there. The main pollinators for this are, again, bumblebees. It hangs down. They go up on top there and get the flower. I've also noticed something very interesting. There is another kind of bee. I think it's called a feather-leg bee. It's a large, looks almost the size of a bumblebee, but I have found that they almost exclusively go to bluebells now to get their pollen. They live underground, and this bee is benefited fantastically when they're forming their little underground nests, and it's a single bee, so one bee per nest near these plants. In fact, I see in some of the places where they're near some of these colonies, there are way more of this other bee than any bumblebees are actually visiting it. So it is a favorite for them. Going on to the next one. Here is one that most people have seen quite a bit, and it's wild blue violet, phlox, sometimes called woodland phlox. Comes in a variety of different sizes, different colors as well. Some of this was used, has been used quite a bit in the horticultural trade to come up with a lot of different cultivars of this. It's a great little plant. It hangs on to its leaves fairly long into the season, so it's not ephemeral. It actually lasts most of the year. It's a deep-throated type of plant. If you can see here, the petals form together, and only something with a very long tongue can get down to get to them. And the biggest ones for this, although there are long-tongued bees, it's butterflies. Butterflies really do get really to make a good use of it. And I think it's kind of funny seeing something like a swallowtail hanging on there. They're so heavy the whole plant spills over, but they're the main pollinators for this kind of thing. They have the long enough tongue, proboscis, they can get down in there and do this kind of thing. Again, they can form nice big patches. It doesn't just grow. It does need something to cross-pollinate it. So one flower can't pollinate itself. It needs other flowers to it. But it does do that. But it also spreads by rhizomes. So vegetatively, you see underneath there, this could have been one plant that slowly has spread along there, and maybe it's not pollinating itself, but it's slowly spreading by rhizomes. So it can form nice little patches. And again, there's lots of different sizes to it. You can see here on the left, you can see both white colors and blue colors and so forth. It is quite a useful plant, and is fairly available. At least the cultivars are. Again, I prefer the true native species, but lots of these things are available in a hort trade. It is one that's come around quite a bit. And again, this is a wild blue phlox, a neat little plant. I may have gone maybe too many, but why don't I stop right here? If there's any questions, be happy to answer them if we move on to the next one.
One question was whether hummingbirds can pollinate Phlox tubericata.
I'm not sure if they can. I have never heard of them actually going in there and doing it. It is the wrong color. So whenever you think of hummingbirds, the things you look at are the color. And most of the times what they look at, it's pink red, orange, that's the things that they really go after. You think of columbines and, you know, and things like that. That's what they're going after. You know, white flowers usually, and that's why I think this is another one that may also be pollinated by moths as well. The white flowers in particular of you can see on the left-hand side, I believe that much more than hummingbirds, what might pollinate these things are the hawk moths, what they call sphinx moths, those big flying moths that fly around, and that includes the daytime ones too, what they sometimes call the clear wings, the beautiful little things that look like hummingbirds or look like bumblebees but are not. That is much more likely to come use this. I'm not going to say it hasn't happened or whatever. I've never heard of it. It very well could be, but it's much more pollinated by butterflies and moths in this case.
I actually saw hawk moths around a phlox patch along the C&O Canal this week. Another question that come up is whether bluebells might also be spread by ants. Do they have that?
There is a story, there is a theory. And again, I'm not sure about this. There is a theory that bluebells do have a lysosome and are spread that way. But people who have actually looked at the seeds do not see this attachment to it that they do see in some of these other things, right? And so some people are thinking that it may look like ants may pollinate it, but it may not be the case. I'm not sure about that one because some people say that they do, and there's other people who say that they don't because there's no proof on the seed that there is a detachable lysosome that they can do that. So I tend to believe that they don't, but it has been reported by some that it is ant spread as well, myrmecoccus.
And there's one observation by Rich Markaloff who says that hummingbirds love Lobelia syphilitica, which is in the purplish blue range.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to, deny that. There's lots of things that will. So look at, for example, you can see a lot of the hummingbirds, and they visit lots of native azaleas, and some of them are very light colored as well. So they will visit more than that. But I don't think that they're the main pollinators. Just like the bumblebees are the main pollinators for things like the squirrel corn and the Dutchman's breeches and bluebells. In this case, it's butterflies that are the main pollinators, and in this case, I think moths as well that are main pollinators in phlox. I'm not saying it's impossible; things can change, but that's probably the way that they've evolved to be. Anything else? Now we'll continue on. So here we go to what's a really cool type of thing. Again, it's the wild geranium, what's sometimes called the crane's bill. And again, sometimes it's called spotted geranium, whatever the case may be. But a wonderful kind of plant that under the right conditions can spread quite well. It's easy to divide. They form large patches, and you can rip. I felt bad when we used to do the plant sales and stuff. I would actually rip off a piece, and oh my God, I've really hurt. I took a big rootstock and I took a piece out of it. I'm really hurting the plant. And I'll be darned if they didn't come right back. In fact, even flower the next year. So this plant is remarkably durable. It can take a lot more sun than many of the other quote unquote spring plants can. Again, it has this bright color. Lots of different things use it. Again, there's a video you can look at it. Can form nice patches of flowers in different areas, and as you can see, different things do like to use it. In this case, you've got a dusky wing that's using that over there. Now, again, geraniums aren't all the same color. If you can see on the side, here's a white geranium on the top left, and on the bottom, one of the reasons that are called crane's bill, and almost all geraniums are called this, is because the seed does look a little bit like this long extension of what might be a crane's bill, a bird beak sticking out of it. Now, there are tons of different geraniums. As a matter of fact, just today, I was outside, and actually I had to change the oil in my car today. So I went over there, and while they were messing with it, there's some extra time, so I went outside, and in the yard of this Jiffy Lube, go and believe if I didn't find 3 different geraniums, none of which were the wild geranium that we're used to. There are other kinds of geraniums, some native and some not. The most common non-native one, the most common native one that we do have around is the Carolina crane's bill. That's the one in the lower left, and it's lighter colored, but if you click on the thing, you can read a little bit more about it. Its leaves are much more dissected. They're really cut down almost to the middle. And then there's tiny little versions of geranium that come out there too. I kind of forget the name of the other ones. I'm forgetting what they call, but there's a lot of different kinds of geranium. So see a geranium, yes, it's great, but you may not be sure is exactly what it is until it starts to bloom and you kind of get a look at it. The wild geranium is the largest of all our geraniums. The Carolina geranium grows maybe the next biggest, but it only lives for about a year. It's a yearly type of plant and dies off. So it's that. By the way, there's an interesting story about the geranium. And again, you got to remember, a lot of people invented stories, and they have to do, because those stories have been recorded here in the United States, many of the stories are Christian based. So we'll tell you one of the Christian based stories about this one. And that is that way back when, these plants used to all be white colored, and some that were growing by the side of a bank when supposedly Jesus came by. And at the time, John the Baptist was there baptizing people. And when Jesus asked to be baptized by John the Baptist, he took off his robes, put them on top of these flowers that were growing, and after his baptism, he took the flowers back up, and in their honor, all the flowers that blushed and that dust became the color of the geranium. Again, there's lots of little stories about all of these, and I'm just telling you some that I've heard about without any leaning to any one thing or another, but just to tell you some of the stories that are out there. Wild geraniums, by the way, have been used in miraculous different kinds. This is, if you had to pick a panacea, something that would cure all different kinds of things, geranium was one of them. It's been used in a bunch of different kinds of things. In fact, Daniel Mormon, who wrote the treaty on all of the ethnobotanical things going on. I mean, this guy wrote the book on North American ethnobotany and how people used plants. And he had another separate book, a tiny book, that he called, it was called Geraniums for the Iroquois. Just on a whole book on how the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, that's their own proper name for themselves, used this particular plant for fevers, for all sorts of different kinds of stuff. This was a cure-all for many of them. And again, I suspect, I have not looked, I'm going to look this back up. I bet you if I look into Francis Porter's book, this would be one of them that's probably pronounced for dealing with headaches and fevers and all sorts of things as well. Toothaches, all of that stuff was probably dealt with and probably mentioned by Porter in this particular thing. So it's a pretty cool type of plant, and that's geraniums. By the way, it tends to be, so this plant supports stuff too. I mentioned the butterfly, which is right up there that's feeding, but there's also about 24 different kinds of caterpillars that feed on the family of geraniums. Not all of them woodland geranium, not all of them this kind, but they do it. This plant was used, by the way, in many tribes to stop bleeding. That was another type of thing. This was, again, a very powerful medicinal plants for the variety of different tribes. Each tribe had different uses for the wild geranium. Okay, moving onwards. So here we have wild ginger, and this is a cool little plant. It's mostly evergreen, and over here again you can get a nice look at it. And you can see all this nice cover over there where it's formed a great ground cover. It's mostly evergreen, so it just holds on to its leaves most of the time. Incredibly easy to grow. If you were to take a little piece and break it off, put it in some moist soil, it usually develops root really, really easily. This is one that's easily sold and by division more than anything else. If you look down here, I've got a little bit more on it. So wild ginger, because of its taste like ginger, has been used and was used by all sorts of different tribes as a substitute for ginger. This was one of the things that it was used for. Having said that, some modern studies have shown that it seems to have some carcinogenic properties to them, at least in large amounts. So this is one that, yes, lots of people used it, and native people used it left and right for everything because it was also medicinal. It helped with upset stomachs and all this kind of stuff. But there is that caution that this particular plant can have, has a carcinogenic effect on some people as well. So just something to beware of. Now it does form flowers, and over here in the top right, you can see the flowers. The flowers are unlike any of the other flowers that you can find. Why? Because they're not up on top, because they're not trying to trap the regular pollinator. They're down below, and most of them are lying flat on the ground, opening right on them. And they don't smell good. They're brownish in color. Some people compare them to tricorn hats. And it's funny, but many times when you see pawpaws with their little tricorner doodle flowers up on top, look down below. Well, oftentimes you'll see the wild ginger going underneath. And so the flowers are there, and what were they used for? Well, the things that would visit it would be things like, they think carrion beetles and ground beetles and stuff like that would crawl into the thing, fungus gnats. They go in there, they visit it, and then that's they would pollinate it. Now, having said that, there is no real proof. No one's actually ever seen one of these little, carrion beetle going in there and pollinating this thing. But that's the theory of why it looks that way, why it's low to the ground, and why it goes that way. Now, having said that, most of the time, this plant spreads vegetatively. It'll grow into nice big pieces. On the bottom, you can see you can break off a little piece, put it in the ground, and it will very easily grow again. So it's mostly vegetative growth more than anything else. It's been used for lots of different things, including for upset stomachs and things like that, dysentery. They used to use it for things like coughs and colds, all of this kinds of stuff, headaches, all of this kinds of stuff. This was used as a medicinal plant for. But again, there are some other studies that say that at least in certain doses, the propertiness, I can't remember what the name of the chemical is carcinogenic, and so just to be aware of that. Before we go on, again, if there's any other questions about this, I'll be happy to answer them, since we did pass a couple. Any questions? And again, if there's,
no, okay. Elena Rodriguez is posting for the tried and true web pages for some of these plants, in case anybody wants to go back and take a look at them or share them with friends.
Good stuff. This is easy, and again, it can take a little bit more sun than other plants can, but it is a light shade, light set moist, semi-evergreen, forms a wonderful ground cover. This is a great little ground cover. And you're looking at something that doesn't grow more than, 3 inches tall. I mean, very evenly grown at a low little spot. A great ground cover that's severely underused.
And I have a question. Have you noted that other wildflowers can grow up within a patch of ginger? Would you interplant it with anything?
Yes. So here's the thing. In the wild, and this is the case of a lot, like things like golden rag, all these things that spread out in a garden condition, don't do so in the wild. In the wild, you see a little patch of this, but there's always something growing in between them. I don't think that this may have the allelopathic properties that some people may presume with other plants. I have seen this growing, and it's always in small patches. If I plant it, it can take over a whole bed. But if it's not, it definitely has things that are growing in between it. I've seen this growing, and there'd be like 3 or 4 little tiny plants in one section, and right next to it there's just tons of trillium and lots of things like that. I've noticed quite a lot of things that can grow in the middle of this. I don't think that even though the roots are right near the top and it can really cover a lot of ground, I don't think that they exclude a lot of plants, at least not from what I've seen. Now, if somebody seems different, it could be different, but from what I've seen, I haven't seen that happen. I've seen them mixed in with lots of stuff when I'm in the woods. Okay, so moving on, we're going right on to another big ground cover. One of my favorites, really. It's golden ragwort. Some people call it golden groundsel. There's lots of different names for this thing. It used to be Senecio aureus, and if you look it up, it will still say that, but now it's been changed to Pacara. We have 3 or so different kinds of ragworts locally, but this is the most common one. And it's useful in a lot of different ways. First of all, it's evergreen. Let me go back here. If you want to, again, there's a nice little video on it. I will say, first of all, it is evergreen. If you look over here on the left, it stays green this whole year. And early in the springtime, particularly, if you turn the leaves over, I got my cursor on it right now, you're going to notice it has purplish underneath its leaves. A very easy way to tell it. The basal leaves are very rounded, and then as it goes up, they change a lot of times. It grows very low to the ground. We're talking about 3 inches or so, but it sends up a flower spike, maybe a foot or so tall. The spikes at first look kind of purplish, and you think like a purple flower or something blue is going to come out of it. But when they do, they're actually beautiful yellow flowers that attract a lot of different kinds of things. Ragwort has at least 18 different kinds of caterpillars that feed on this thing. So it supports a lot of more things. That's just the caterpillars that feed on the plant. In reality, the flowers are visited by a lot of other pollinators as well. But it doesn't spread so much because of seeds. In reality, what it's doing is it's vegetatively sending out more and more rhizomes, and that's how it spreads. This is a great substitute to put in place of things like English ivy and things like that. English ivy can climb up the trees. It can strangle trees. It can act as a wind thing, so when there's too much wind, it can blow it over. And it can actually form places where fungus and lots of diseases can grow. This doesn't do that. It stays very low, knee to the ground. Again, it can take some sun, but in reality, it likes moist ground, and that's where it's going to do the best. Great substitute for English ivy. Now, having said that, there's lots of different kinds of things that were used with this. Their name ragwort, it tells you that it was used for something. This particular one was used for all sorts of what they used to call it back in the past as a uterine tonic. It was something that was used for all sorts of different kinds of things like that. But it is an evergreen ground cover, and that's probably what we would use it for. But it does have some other things to it. Moving on to the next one, we're going to start the first of our look at Solomon seal, and this is the most common one. Some people have divided up, and there's not just the Solomon seal, but there's a greater Solomon seal that I've seen of 3 feet tall or so. But most of the time, it's this one, Polygonotum biflorum. Biflorum because it does have 2 flowers. You can see right here, the flowers come from from in between the leaves, okay, and they come mostly, not all the time, mostly in pairs of 2, thus biflorum, 2-flowered. Again, if you want to learn more about it, I have a little video on it here. Here you can see, again, a bunch of the little flowers hanging down. They hang down low. You can see the 2 flowers there on the side. That's the big way of telling them apart. When they do get visited, they do have the little berries. You can see it up on top. This particular plant grows in long little, long rhizomes along the bottom, like a long stretch. And every time, so one part of it will come out. Out comes the plant one year, it dies back, and then further along the trunk that's underneath there, another one will come up. What's left over are what looks like little seals, scars, that some people say, well, that's a Solomon seal, there's these little scars of where the plants came out. Other people think it's called Solomon seal because if you were to look very carefully at the plants themselves, they have about 6 petals each, so they've thought about the Star of David and so forth, and they started thinking about that. But a neat plant, another woodland plant. I don't know much about this. The plants that I've grown don't transplant as well and don't do as well as the next one. We're going to talk about the false Solomon seal, but it is grown in lots of different things. There are some varieties of it with beautiful variations and so forth, striations on the leaves and so forth. But again, I always go for the true native because I suspect that's what's going to support the most wildlife. When you start messing with the plants, that's when it doesn't support as much wildlife. But anyways, this is a great little plant. This is the again, Solomon seal. There's only about 1 caterpillar that I've heard of that actually uses this kind of thing, but it's a pretty cool kind of plant. So actually, we'll stop here, and if anybody has any questions, that's great. If not, I'll move on to the next one, which is very closely related to this one, or I should say, looks a lot like it. I should say. All right, good. I'll tell you what. Let's move on to the false Solomon seal.
Alonso?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
There was Joan McIntyre was saying that she had understood that there was the golden ragwort can push out mustard garlic. Does that happen?
Well, now unfortunately, it's difficult to. Now, the good thing, if you do grow a monoculture, and this is a good one to grow, would be golden ragwort. It's very good about protecting its own turf. Okay, I'll leave it at that. If you plant it and you expect it to crowd out these other things, I'm not so sure, because there's another secret thing that the garlic mustard have. It's allelopathic, so it's altering the soil, including some of what they presume are some of the mycorrhizal fungi that these things need. So it's one thing that if you could push it out one way or the other, but I don't think garlic mustard plays fair. It's altering the soil and preventing other things from germinating, and that may be a problem. The good thing with garlic mustard is that even if it doesn't reproduce from seeds, it can continuously spread out. So I think that more than anything else, it has the best chance of doing it, especially since most garlic, when you look at garlic mustard, you're looking at a 2-year plant. So while the thing is gone, it can move into that area. So there is promise to it, but overall, it would be a tough battle to see that it wins. But if anything has a chance of doing it, I will say golden ragwort is probably the best. It really is good at doing this kind of stuff, and even if it's not reproducing by seeds, it can slowly push something else out. Especially if it leaves that area on its 2nd year and it's no longer occupying it, then it can take that ground over again. It is possible. Anything else? All right. Well, let's continue on with then the false Solomon seal, which again, a lot of people say, well, you know what? It's really not false. Yes, it doesn't look like the true Solomon seal, but it's, there's some really good things to it. So some people now call it Solomon's plume or gentleman's plume. The scientific name has changed. It used to be Smilacina. Now it's been changed to Myanthemum. And again, it's kept what's mostly the racemosum. It means that on the end of it, as you can see, is where it grows its tau, the plume of flowers. It's at the end. And that's the big thing between this the Solomon's and the Solomon's thing, because this thing has the flowers growing from underneath where the leaves would come out along the plant itself. This one always, it's at the very end of it. That's one of the big differences between the two. Now, having said that, this is what the flowers look like. They're actually pretty cool looking. Again, not all flowers will produce an abundance of them, but if it's happy and healthy, it will produce some good amounts of flowers. It will produce pretty much almost every year, which is different from some other plants that we'll talk about a little bit later. A lot of different names for this thing. It's sometimes called false spikenard, as well as I mentioned, gentleman's plume. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because all the continental U.S. has a version of false Solomon seal. This is about as universal a plant and as an adaptable plant as you're going to find, because every single solitary state in contiguous U.S. does have false Solomon seal on it. The only place that doesn't, I think, is I think Hawaii. So this plant is incredibly adaptable. It does like shade, it does like moist, but it tends to be much more adaptable, and that's spread in so many places because it's good doing that. It does well in the garden. It can form nice little patches of it. It tends to spread pretty nicely. I suspect it must spread vegetatively. I can't speak to that, but it always seems like it's done that way, at least in the gardens that I've seen it in. If you look at it here, you'll notice a lot of neat things about it. If it does get pollinated on the right-hand side, it produces these little berries. And again, they're not edible by people, but it does produce these little berries that, apparently birds and other kinds of things like, and so it does spread quite a bit. But that is a little bit about, again, false Solomon seal, except again, nothing false about it. It is a beautiful little plant. Both of these, both the Solomon seals and the false Solomon seals, are considered edible, but apparently the way to do it involves a lot of, it's not, you can't just eat it right off the ground. You have to prepare it. And some people say that makes it less edible than other things. It's not something you can eat right off the bat. But anyways, that's false Solomon seal. And then we go on to probably one of my favorites. It's Jack-in-the-pulpit, or if you want to call one of the many other kinds of names that it has, Indian turnip, bog onions, wake robins. Again, lots of things are called wake robins. Wake robins or brown dragon. Again, it used to be divided up in several different species, and then it combined them all together. The green ones are different from the brown ones, and some are bigger. Well, now they all come together, and there used to be 3 other plants, so now it's our same triphyllum. Well, it used to be 3 plants have been put together into one solitary plant, triphyllum. Here is my favorite look at them. When you open up if you look inside the pulpit, the beautiful striations on this particular one. This plant has some neat things to it, very different from other types of things. If you see a big, large one, it is a female plant, okay? And well, actually, let me talk a little bit more about it. So there's other variations on what ways that the plant looks like. Here is a video on it and so forth. If you look down here, I want you to see a couple of things. So again, there's different color forms. The way that it works is the first couple of plants, when they come up, they look a lot like poison ivy, and so people have picked them out or whatever, because it takes a little bit of time for this thing to actually grow to flower. Some people say it's about 3 years more or less before one of these things will flower. When it does flower, because it hasn't stored enough energy, it actually forms male flowers. The male flowers are mostly pollinated by fungus gnats, okay? The fungus gnats get in there, they wrap around, and on the bottom of the male flowers is a little opening the gnat can get out of. But if it then goes to a female flower, which is much bigger, twice the size, the plant itself is twice the size of a male Jack-in-the-pulpit. If you see a big Jack-in-the-pulpit, it's a female, okay? If it flies in there, there is no bottom opening for it to get out, so it gets stuck in there, pollinating it, and thus that's how you get the actual spadix to come out. They look like, as you can see here in the middle, they start off first green and whatever, and then they turn this bright red color. So this thing has calcium oxalate in it, type of crystal that and act by the same thing as skunk cabbage has. That is that can really cause some caustic burns. If you're to eat this thing, it can really cause you a lot of burns. Having said that, though, drying it and then cooking it does get rid of the calcium oxalate, and then it becomes very much edible. Thus the name Indian turnip. You can do it that way. In fact, there's a neat little story. I think it's by a group, the Meskwaki. I think that might have been the tribe. Anyways, it was subservient to another group. I think it was the Lakota. And so at one point, the other group, the Lakota, I believe, in what I've heard of it, will come in and always ask for payment from these people for them having protection, as it were, and all this kind of stuff. Well, at one point, the little tribe, which could never defeat the larger tribe, decided they do a trick on them. They supposedly, according to this legend, invited all the warriors over, and at that night they celebrated by having them eat the food that they had prepared for them. And after they'd all eaten it at one time, they started getting severe digestive problems and so forth. The calcium oxide were burning their throats, burning their mouths, and burning their stomachs. And in great pain that they were, and some of them actually died from eating these things. The Meskwaki, I think it's that tribe, had laid into their former enemies and defeated them in this great thing, all brought about because of the improper preparation of Jack-in-the-pulpit as being the food for them. But you can eat them, and some people get the roots, dry them all out, cook them, and they divide them up almost like little fries, really. And that's one way you can eat them. But it's a great little type of plant. But this thing can change. Starts off female, gets enough energy, it forms a female plant. If it forms a bunch of these berries that you see over here, well, by the next year it probably can't support blooming, and either it doesn't bloom the next year or it forms female plants the next year. This can change sex every year depending on how healthy it is and whether or not it can support another flower. Anyway, it's a pretty cool little type of plant. I don't think if there's anything else. Oh yes, it's not self-compatible, so believe it or not, it's got to get a fungus out or something else to trick into going into it for it to form berries. It's not one that will spread vegetatively and other things. Some people, like for example, we actually, luckily I read about this before we did this, we wanted to grow this in our native plant nursery because it'd be a great plant. Of course, people really like it on whatever on the outside. Luckily, I had read that the calcium oxalate is concentrated in a lot of different pieces, including its seeds. So if you're taking the seeds apart and cleaning them up, you get that stuff on you. Lord forbid you rub your eyes or something like that. It can cause a rash. It can cause a lot of different kinds of things. So it is something that if you're moving them, some people are more allergic than others. You got to be careful when you're playing around with this plant. All right, anyways, before we move on, oh, and again, the little plants look a lot like poison ivy, and people sometimes mistake that and get rid of them, just so you know. But are there any other questions before we move on to the next thing?
A little bit more about cultivating this plant would be
Sure.
helpful, including if you wanted to plant several of them, how close would the male and the female plants need to be?
Well, again, remember, it can change from male to female every other year. So the spacing is not so important because from one year to another, the healthier one will develop into females, or they both could be females. So I don't think the spacing matters very much. Now, I have seen where all of the fruits fall down directly under it, and then you end up with a pile of like 6 plants all in one. That's not going to work. Then it's competing against itself, and it will never be healthy. But you can divide them. I've divided them quite a bit. I don't think that this plant survives as well as some other plants. Like I mentioned, the wild ginger, you can cut the thing and it'll keep growing. You could take just a chunk out of wild ginger and keep growing. On this one, you got to be a little bit more careful about moving the roots and so forth. It's not as adjusted to being to having the soils and everything messed with. But once you get it going, it does okay. I do think that there's a limit as to how long it lives. I don't know what that upper limit might be, but I've seen good patches of them, and then 3 or 4 later going back, and there were just nothing there. I don't know if they died out, they didn't continue, whatever the case may be. Maybe the soils changed, whatever. But I don't think this is the longest lived plant as you would with some of the other ones. Any other questions? All right, well, we'll move on. Chris, and again, I know this is running long, I apologize, but hopefully we can finish some of this other stuff. Here are the Mayapples, and again, Mayapples are great. What a great ephemeral ground cover. When they first come up, you've seen these little, what some people call toad shades, whatever, all over the place, okay? And it's got an interesting lifestyle to them. Again, there's a nice little video here that talks about the plant itself you can click on later. If you look at this, here in the bottom left, you see just what a great ephemeral ground cover can be. The whole area is covered in these little umbrellas, as there were. Now, the ones that get the most sun they are the small, the leaves don't open up as much because the sun can really hurt it, okay? So the ones that are growing in large areas, their leaves tend to be much smaller. But in the deep woods, they form these little umbrellas, and the umbrellas can grow quite a bit. Most of the time it spreads vegetatively. It just sends out another little runner and it keeps popping up out of there. So most of these plants are vegetative, but they form just one little seed up on top. Oh, I'm sorry, one little leaf up on top. If it forms two leaves, that's when you get a flower. Because in between the two leaves that come out is what some people call an apple blossom look. That is the flower to it. And again, it forms that time. It's much more than May. Yes, it can grow in May, but I think most of the time around here, I've seen late April or so. But you see this little apple blossom. The main pollinator of that is, again, bumblebees. Apparently, bumblebee queens really like the pollen from here to use for other types of things. So that is the thing that does it. By the way, there's about 4 different kinds of caterpillars to feed on this. Anyway, going down to here, you got the flower. A bumblebee visits it. Okay, it forms a fruit. The other plants that did not get pollinated, they tend to die back. Okay, but the ones that do get pollinated, they form this little thing on the side. Some people call it a raccoon berry, a lemon berry, whatever the case may be. That on the side there forms the fruit on it. The main, again, it's the main seed spreader for this is usually box turtles. They just come out, knock over the plant, eat the lemon berry, raccoon berry, whatever they want to, and continue on. Now, this plant is very interesting. All parts of this plant, even the fruit that's unripe, is poisonous. In fact, some supposedly in some places, this was used for ritual suicide. You think about it and you basically keel over. But the same type of poisons are in there have been used now in all sorts of different kinds of medical practice. They're right now studying how good it is against for combating cancer and so forth. Again, they're looking at the properties through this. Now, those properties don't protect from anything. If anybody's walked through there, deer love it. For some reason, they can eat this thing and it doesn't matter at all. You just keep on going. You see all just the little twigs walking through there as all the tops have been eaten off of these things. But it is edible in one condition. That left-hand side, when that raccoon berry starts to turn yellow and has an interesting citrusy smell to it, then that berry itself, something's called a lemonade berry, is edible. You can make lemonade out of it, you can eat it, whatever like that. But again, if you're not sure about this thing and when it's ripe and when it's not ripe, this is not the plant you practice your first foraging trip on. Okay, you have to be sure that it's ripe in order to eat that kind of thing. When you eat it, it's kind of citrusy and so forth. It's kind of neat, but again, you don't want to make a mistake and eat it at the wrong time, because it'll give you some serious digestion problems at best. At worst, it can, again, it can really put a hurting on you. So it's just something to realize about these things. Again, two leaves, that's when it forms the flowers. When it doesn't, it's not. And again, there's lots of other names for it. Some people call it American mandrake. Ground lemons, because the little thing on the side. Those are all kind of neat names for it. And again, it makes a great ground cover in woodland situations. But again, it is ephemeral. Only a few of the plants hold on to their leaves, and only the ones that are producing fruit. Anyways, any questions about this one before we move on? Don't try this if don't try experimenting with edible plants by using this one. That's for sure.
How can we propagate if that fruit, does it have seeds inside of it?
Yes, they do. But I will say that's not the best way of doing it. I'm trying to remember how long it takes for I don't think it's immediate. I don't think it's like the next year that the plant comes out. So much easier to do is to find a nice a place that. And we used to do this when we did our native plant sales. We'd go out there, and the ones that are going into the trail, they're going to get trampled anyways. They're going to die because people are going to trample on them. We dig those up. And you have to be careful, because some have some little roots to them and some don't have enough. But if you get just the right ones and you come off, it transplants fairly well, okay? Now remember, it's an ephemeral, so it may look like it's not surviving. It comes along and then, you might, oh, wow, a month later it's starting to die down. I give it a chance, because remember, it could be dying down because it's an ephemeral, and it'll come back up when there's no leaves in the trees next year. But we used to do that quite a bit. Get one that has a decent amount of this amount of roots on the vegetative part that's portion, that's the easiest way to doing it. With seeds, it's much, much harder. I don't exactly know what, for example, it has to go through a cold season or whatever for it to germinate. So it's not like you can plant it and it'll grow right away. I think it has to go through at least one germination period. So just something to remember. Another question?
There is a question or a comment that it can cure warts.
Oh, so here's the interesting thing about it. So yes, I mentioned the cancer thing, which, you know, seems like an important thing to me, but in reality, there's all sorts of things that are being done with these things, okay? People have been using it as a topical type of medicine for, you know, for whatever, including, guess what, getting rid of warts. The same kind of chemicals and so forth, which I think may be effective at these other things, are very effective to that. So they would put on there a wart or whatever the case may be, and it will kill whatever is there. So yes, it has been used for treating warts and so forth. That is another common use for this thing in herbal societies. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on. I swear, folks, we're getting near the end. So there you go. Moving on. Here we go. Moving on, then we go to one of my favorites. A lot of people don't realize this neat little plant, but to me, I think it's a favorite of mine. In fact, believe it or not, my wife has it growing here because this is a wonderful terrarium plant. This is one that my wife has growing inside the house. It's such a cool little plant. Anyway, this is a partridge berry. The name Mitchell, again, named after Joe Mitchell. No, not Joe Mitchell. Well, Mitchell, anyway, the fondness is Mitchell. Repin means creeping. This is the creeping, the creeping portion of it, and that is what it is. It's an evergreen, non-climbing ground cover. It spreads slowly. Oh, a lot of people plant it. Oh, well, it'll cover this whole area. No, it takes a while for this to grow. And it does not like competition, so where it's growing, it's oftentimes on the hillsides, places that don't get covered by leaves at the base of a tree or something like that. Then it forms some nice little evergreen ground covers. It's got the opposite little leaves to it. Beautiful, great little ground cover, and it is evergreen. Even in the middle of winter, you can see these things. Wonderful. Now, my favorite part, personally, is I love when it's in flower. You can see the flower over here, and here it comes over, and you'll want to notice at the bottom that at the bottom, the two flowers are connected together, okay, right down here in the bottom. That's important because as you move through, these bottom leaves, once they're, and again, you can see down here, look at the great ground cover it makes over here, right? But over here, when both the flowers get pollinated, the ovaries fuse together, okay? And they fuse together, and so that they form one, what may be considered a large berry. Over here, you can see a berry, and you might notice there's two little spots to it. These are where the two berries join together to make one, okay? So in reality, I guess there's two seeds or whatever in there, but it's actually joined together into one different thing. This in some cultures, this was used as an interesting type of thing. When it's in bloom, they would give the two-flowered plant as a gift, or they would give the berries, because again, the symbolicness of you have two that have become one, you know, through marriage. These two now become one, and what they're producing is one. And so this was a symbolic type of thing that was supplied that way. A great little plant. Again, it never grows more than maybe 2 inches tall at best. The little flowers above there. It doesn't like a lot of competition, but it can grow in areas, rough areas that other things may not be able to grow. And again, a wonderful terrarium plant. And I don't usually keep plants indoors that are native plants, but this one I love, and that's why it's part of our indoor terrarium that I have. This is Mitchella repens. Now, partridge berry, the berries are edible. They're pretty bland. There's nothing special about the berries, honestly. They don't taste like much. I doubt it's the favorite. I've seen the berries hang on for a long period of time, so I doubt it's a favorite of anything. I doubt the partridges and grouse and stuff eat it that much, but it is there, and something must eat it because that's how the seed is spread. So, again, a little tiny bit about about partridge berry. There's other names for it too: running fox, two-eyed berry, because you can see where the two eyes and stuff are. A great little plant. Oh yeah, I was going to mention something. This is one, everywhere it sends out, it'll reroot in the bottom. So if you find like this, like on the bottom, you find a little section there, find a couple places where it's rerooted, you can easily take it out and move it to another area. It's a good way because you can't count on the seeds propagating and so forth. the best way of doing this is by division. And again, you want a shady place that doesn't get leaf cover, and usually moist, and that's where this thing does the best. A wonderful little thing. Oh, I'm getting some water because somebody's saying my throat is getting.
And while you think how much sun could this plant take?
No,
If
it does
somebody-
not. It does not like sun. It's a shady type of plant. I've seen it growing on hillsides and so forth, but I've never seen it growing. Well, I've seen it grow on the edges of paths, but I've never seen it grow in a meadow or anything like that.
Thank you.
All
All right,
right,
and you
so-
have 2 more plants, is that correct, Alonso?
Yeah, I think I got might have 2 more plants, and then I think I'm done. Anyways, this, by the way, a lot of people will collect this thing for Christmas because it's an evergreen, and in some places that has led to it's been collected, and that's really caused some issues in some places. It doesn't reproduce as quickly as you think. And that's why, again, it's a ground cover, but you have to have some patience. You expect for it to cover a lot of ground. All right, moving on then. I think I have 2 left. Yeah, 2 left, and then that's it. So I'm sorry, folks, it has been a little while. But here, let's look at the water leaves. And here is the most prominent one across Virginia. This is the Virginia, or something called Eastern waterleaf. The waterleaf, because if you look at the young leaves, and only the young leaves, you notice they have spots all over, blotches. Again, as though it's been watermarked. Somebody put water on there, and that's the marks that you see. The bigger the plant grows, the more the marks disappear until you end up with just a plain green plant, okay? This blooms much later, which is why it's the last ones here. Much later than all the other ones. This blooms usually in May or so. It does have really cool flowers. You see on the side over here. It forms these nice little flowers. Again, after many other flowers are through blooming. When all the big parts of April and all the beautiful flowers that are out there right now are done, this is one of the plants that continues to bloom and adds something else to the woodlands that they add their little piece of it as an exclamation point to the end. Now, this along with the other one we're going to talk about, hydrophyllum, again, water loving. Why? It loves water. It's almost growing near the edges of rivers and the streams and things like that. That's where it prefers to grow. Another name for it is brook salad. I will say this is considered an emergency food. It doesn't taste that good, but it is edible. And we're kind of lucky because, again, I've mentioned several times when things have come up from the north and come down and grown along our edges. I mentioned with, for example, the white trout lily and stuff like that. The slender toothwort, whatever. Here is another one. Look very carefully. I want you to look at the leaves. They're long and angular on these, okay? They're much longer than they are wider. Along the rivers, we get another plant that comes in from the mountains, but again, find niches along areas. And when it does find a good niche that it's doing well, it can grow in large amounts, so unlike many other flowers where you find 2 or 3 little tiny white trout little, this can completely cover a side of a river if you find just the right niche for it. So look how long and slender these are over here on this one, and then compare it to this one. Here is broadleaf waterleaf, sometimes called Canada, or bluntleaf, maple leaf. Anyways, you'll notice that these leaves are palmate. They're much wider. They're almost as wide as they are long. Compared to this one where they're longer than they are wider, these are just as wide as they are long. Again, they have the typical of all water leaves. They got the typical splotches on their leaves, but as they get older, if you look on the left, the leaves disappear and you end up with just a flat. When it's about to flower, it no longer has a lot of leaves on it. Again, another edible plant, one that's very common along the river at Turkey Run, River Bend, Great Falls. This is one that, because it's come up from a river, it's on just the right area, and it can completely populated, that it will there'll be more of this in certain habitats than the Virginia waterleaf. Even though the Virginia waterleaf is common throughout the rest of the state, around the Potowmack River and so forth, this is the more common waterleaf. And I think it's kind of funny. The old books never had this listed. I don't know how many times I remember back before I even worked at Riverbend in Fairfax County, they used to list, Virginia waterleaf. And I was like, it's not Virginia waterleaf. It's just that none of the books listed it as a mountain plant. It wasn't found around here. Well, now we found out it's very, very popular. So this is, again, another one of the strange the later blooming plants. Another easy one to grow. It likes some water. This also easy to divide. I think the broadleaf is in particular over the other one. It's easy to divide as long as the area is moist. It can take a little bit more sun than some of the other ones can. and it grows quite well. It's another one that can spread both vegetatively and can spread it can spread both by rhizomes as well as by flowers. So it's a neat little type of thing. So again, that's Virginia Waterleaf. So I'll answer whatever questions you have. Here's some more contact information for me if you like. But if you have any more questions to wrap this up, please let me know. And as I've said, this hopefully will be out for people to look at later on, which is, I think, a great thing. We're trapped indoors, but you know what? There's still lots of cool stuff going outdoors. This May, on a rainy day, if you can't get outside even for your own personal walk, or if you want to review something, I hope that this will last into the future as something that people can really use to update themselves on some of the more common wildflowers. We can do some of the rare ones some other time, but these are some of the common ones that you see around here, and hopefully some of the ones that people hopefully have seen in the wild, and they pop back up again, at least for us to talk about. But any questions though?
Alonso, maybe you'd like to tell us some of your other favorite, you've mentioned Turkey Run and Riverbend and Great Falls. Any other favorite places to go and enjoy the wildflowers here?
So I will say, first of all, you already mentioned my favorite, but my favorite place of all places is Riverbend. You gotta remember, I worked there for 3 years. So my heart will always be in Riverbend. I mean, that is my favorite. But I will say, even though Riverbend is a large park and so forth, I think that just about every plant that will be in Riverbend, along every ephemeral, every riverside plant that you find in Riverbend, can be found in Turkey Run, and even some extra ones too that aren't found in Riverbend. So Turkey Run, locally, it's one of the easiest places to go to that you can find the widest variety of flowers. I was just there, Lucy, when we were there, like 2 days ago. We were there like 2 days ago. Yesterday? Oh my goodness. Okay, yesterday. And you know what? It was beautiful. A lot of plants this year came over and stopped up. Started early, but it's still beautiful to look at, and some of the later stuff was coming up now. So that's a good place. Anywhere along the Potowmack River that you can find. Great Falls, although it's spread out, that's another good spot. I'm trying to remember, what is the name of it's not Banshee Weeks. There is a great place. They have their own Bluebell Festival. And it's a great little spot. Darn it, it's got it's the headquarters for the Master Naturalist over there. I can't remember, but it's got beautiful stuff there too. Go by any river. That's where you can find most of the flowers right now.
Merrimack Farms.
Merrimack Farms, that's the one. Great little spot, And Bull Run, of course. But I will say, if you compare by biodiversity-wise, I will say the biodiversity-wise, Riverbend and Turkey Run you can find maybe 40 flowers there on any given day that are in bloom or close to bloom. You might only find 15 or 20 at Bull Run or Merrimack Farms. Those other ones, because by the Potowmack River, have much more things. You don't just have yellow trout lilies, you have white trout lilies. You don't just have, you have all these extra things. You don't just have slender cutleaf toothwort, but slender toothwort. Lots of things that came up from the top. So I do think that the ones along the Potowmack River have much more. And another interesting place that a lot of places don't visit is Banshee Reeks. If you go by there by the river, and again, it's not the big profusion as other places. Banshee Reeks has some very interesting plants and some wonderful rock formations that a lot of things can grow on. You go a little bit further off, my two favorite places away from here, if you're willing to drive a little bit. I used to lead, and I have been leading for 15, 16 years, the trips to Linden. This will be the first year in 15 or 16 years that I have not led 1, 2, 3 trips to see the wildflowers at Linden. The beautiful white trilliums up there, the orchids and so forth, and kind of sad. I intend to go visit it again, just so I can keep my tradition going. The flowers at Linden, the George Washington Thompson, it's a registry site of the Virginia Plant Society. And at Linden, if you look at the Trillium Trail that the Native Plant Site has already marked off, that is the best collection of some very good plants close by. I will say that if you don't know your way around there are lots of plants that are easy to miss. Right now, all the morel hunters are out there right now. But I encourage you, next year I hope to be there again, leading a couple of trips. I encourage you to come along there, because I do know, after being there with lots of different people, where some of the hidden gems are, and it's always cool to see something that other people walk right by. It is always cool to see that.
Alonso, we're getting just dozens and dozens of thanks and comments like this is the best, much better than anything on TV, and
Oh,
that
cool.
you light a fire in this subject and bring such passion to
I'm
it.
not sure. I always thought I had more of a face for radio than for TV, but that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Alonso.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite everyone, if you'd like to everyone who remains with us, and some people have gotten off. We had 110 people at one
Whoa.
point.
Wow.
To take your video to add your video if you'd like to see one another, and if you don't want to, that's fine. 2 other questions came up that we haven't had a chance to answer, so people who need to leave will just leave.
Okay.
One is whether spring beauties can be grown in a lawn that will
Oh,
obviously
yes.
be mowed. The second question goes back to the false Solomon seal, and who might enjoy eating the berries on that. So
I've never eaten the berries. I didn't know they were edible, to be honest. I know that the plant is, if you prepare it one way is. I've never actually eaten the berries.
do you know if any other critters eat them?
Oh, I'm sure they do. The only reason a thing about foreign berries is because they're attracting someone to eat them. So someone must eat it. I just don't know what it might be off the top of my head. But somebody has to eat them or they wouldn't form berries.
And then spring beauties in a lawn?
Oh, absolutely. And again, because in many places we mow the lawns and stuff like that, they can really do well in lawns. It's easy to miss them, but they come up and then they're gone. But they can do very well in lawns as long as it's moist enough. If it's dry enough, they won't do it. But if it's moist enough, they can take a fair amount of sunlight. You can see them in wide open glades anywhere along the Potowmack. They do very well. Probably a little bit better than things like bluets. They don't do as well in these kinds of things. But yes, spring beauties, if you can get them going in the edge of a lawn or something like that, even when they get a ton of light, as long as they don't dry out, they're going to do well. Moisture is the big trick for those. I got some now that I'm growing along the edge of my, and as long as I keep them moist, they do well. But again, they're nowhere near any kind of water, but they're doing well just because I water them to keep them going there.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
I have Mayapples that I purchased from Merrifield Garden Center.
Okay.
And the tree that they were under has since died this past year. It was a dogwood. Do I need to transplant those Mayapples to another shady area?
Well, okay, now what's going to happen without that shade, and granted, a dogwood only going to provide so much shade, but what's going to happen is the plants are going to grow up and the leaves, which were much broader, are going to shrink up. They're going to be all along the veins alone because it's going to try to prevent itself from sun blistering, from the heat, okay? If you see that they don't do well, they don't bloom or anything like that, or worse, they don't just thin out, but the leaves start to droop, then you may think about moving them. But if not, they can survive a lot of times, especially if you're gonna put something else there to provide somewhat a little bit of shade. We've had areas where they've taken out certain types of trees, and underneath you're like, wow, there's these things growing, and we've had them growing on W Trail many times, and have been there for years, even though it gets a ton of sun. So I would not necessarily move them. I'd see how they do this year. They will come out much stranger looking, if all the leaves will be shrink up. But if the leaves aren't drooping down and it's still producing flowers, I don't think you need to move them.
Okay. They actually, you're absolutely right, which we know, but they are much smaller. The leaves are much smaller this year. They're about 1/3 the size they were last time.
It's trying to protect itself as best it can. That doesn't mean you can't, they're not going to grow. Watch them for a little bit, but if you start to see them droop, you may want to move them. You may want to move them. They may add too much for them.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And of course, they don't need to be as large because they're in sun.
They don't need it. Yeah.
Okay.
No reason to spend the extra energy on stuff they don't need anymore. All right, anybody else?
You mentioned bluets. Is there
Yes.
a place? Is there a way I can get bluet seeds or someplace I can get them?
I remember that I've seen someone sell them. I can't remember who. Yeah, that's a difficult one. I don't think it transplants as well. It likes moist areas. But I will say there's something so cool about bluets in bloom. I love bluets, Quaker ladies, whatever you want to call them. To me, that is just awesome. But I'm trying to remember where I've seen them for sale, and I can't recall, but I have seen them. If you do online, you may be able to get some. What they're going to send you, of course, are just the little pips, the little rootlets of them, and hopefully they do well. They don't do well in sun. They do like very moist soil. They like more sandy soil than regular clay, but when they bloom, they're beautiful.
Somebody just
Oh,
said,
no competition, no competition. If there's any competition with them, they won't do well.
okay.
This is Ann Blackston. I have bluets under
Yes.
a tree between two huge roots, and they're teeny tiny,
Yeah.
and they survived so far for 1 year.
Yeah,
And
and
they're
and
cute.
if
I
there's
mean,
no
all I can
competition.
say is they're very cute. They're very, very tiny.
I love them. And again, right there, they may not get any competition from anywhere else. It's, you know, they're taking it's just like Virginia saxifrage, early saxifrage. You see it growing in the worst places. In the nursery, it's really funny. It pops out in all sorts of places, but because it has no competition, okay? It grows on cliff faces. Saxifrage means rock breaker, so it grows in these rocks in the cracks and stuff. But if you put it in an area where other things are growing, it disappears. It grows in top places, in places with very low soil. It does great. And I think much like the bluets, it's taking advantage of a niche that other ones find very less tolerable, and it can take advantage of it. And that gives it the advantage that it needs over many of the other ones. You see it growing on rocks, and you're like, wow, how can it grow in that little tiny rock? Because there's no one else who can grow there. That's why.
Got it at Earth Sangha. Earth Sangha last year.
They have tons of them because over there they pop into every other seed. It's a we over there, pardon my language, as opposed to everyone else. Everyone's just dying to find. And I got some from Earth Sangha. And by the way, I love Earth Sangha. And I'm, you know, not officially working for the county. I love Earth Sangha. We do all our business with Earth Sangha from the county. But even if we didn't, I would personally purchase on them because they're really knowledgeable and do everything they can. They helped us get our nursery started. And again, I buy stuff from all the time. The little saxifrage that I got last year, this year is amazing. It's twice the size it was, completely in bloom. It's just finishing now. And I'm actually thinking about it. If it doesn't produce any seeds or something like that, see if I can somehow divide it. It's growing underneath my mailbox. Go figure it out because I keep that clear.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Right, any other questions, folks? Well, I want to thank you for allowing me to do this. It stinks not being able to go out with groups, the like-minded folks in the woods. It kills me, believe me. And so I appreciate this little opportunity to kind of pretend like I was doing it, if nothing else.